Hi, welcome to the garage of the TheThrottleCable. I'm Rob, and yeah, today we're going to be talking about wheels. If you've seen the channel before, you're probably familiar with the 996. The car I bought came with GT3 wheels from a 996.2. Lovely wheels, but for me, not in keeping with a 98 model car because it's a previous generation. And for that vintage car, I was finding the offset too aggressive. And one of the biggest reasons was I was finding the car too overtired. So I've decided to change them. And that's what I'm going to talk about today. So yeah, the GT3.2, let's call it, tyre and wheel setup on the 996. 8.5 inch on the front, 11 inch rim on the rear, and they give you a 235 section front tyre and a 295 rear section tyre. Now for me, for what is fast becoming a vintage 911 with just under 300 brake horsepower, far too much tyre and traction to make it a fun, agile car. So what I've decided to do is move those wheels on. I've sold them to somebody that's actually got a GT3 and they're going to use them as some track day wheels. And I've ordered some custom made to measure motorsport wheels to go on the car. There's a couple of reasons for doing that. Because they are custom order, you get to choose your PCD, your offset and your centre bore, so they're exactly as I want them. And yeah, I've got some logic as to the dimensions I've chosen, which I'll take you through in a bit if you want to hear that. It's quite geeky. And I wanted a lightweight wheel. I wanted a lightweight wheel that was strong enough, hence a tarmac rally wheel. And also I didn't want to fool myself with, I've looked at some of the OZ wheels and the offset of them isn't quite right. I would have wanted them spaced out slightly further, and the concept of getting a lightweight wheel and then adding spacers and then adding extra long high tensile steel bolts through them, all the weight saving is gone. If you can get a wheel that's custom made to the right offset, you don't have excess metal in the hub, you don't have to have an extra spacer, and you don't have to have oversized lug bolts going through the wheel to hold it all together. So the sum total should be a lighter, stronger wheel. They should arrive today, which is why I'm doing the video now. I'm really excited to get them here because they were manufactured in Spain. And the day that they were shipped, Spain announced it was going to lock down the country because of coronavirus. Brilliant. So they were then moved across the border into France. And they sat there until a Sunday night. And then the French government said they were going to lock down French soil as well. And then they were moved into the UK that night. And I'm now waiting their delivery. So fingers crossed they'll get here and I can show you them. The tyres that are going on them are currently sat behind me. I've got Michelin PS2s, N-rated tyres, 225 section fronts and 265 section rears. So I'm losing 10 mil of track on the front and 30 mil from each tyre on the rear. So it should make it much more fun, much more agile, and yeah, should be quite a looker. These wheels, I've never seen a Porsche running them before. I've seen a picture and I've spoken to one person with a Porsche Turbo that I've seen them on from a competition car, but yeah, never seen these out in the wild. So hopefully it will be something quite new and exciting to share with you. So yeah, wish me luck. So if you followed my channel before, you might know, other than being a Porsche geek, I'm also a bit of a perfectionist and want to know everything that's going on with the car. And when I had the opportunity to get custom made wheels, I wanted to make sure I knew everything I needed to know about the offsets and that I got exactly what I wanted as the end product. So I did quite a lot of research, which you might find useful. I won't go through it line by line, but if you like the logic here and you want to pause it and go back and look at it, it's some interesting data that you won't have to work out for yourself. So what did I do? I looked at, first off, the standard wheels in this top section here. So my GT3 wheels were on the car, the turbo look wheels that would have come on my car originally, and then the two real popular choices on the early Gen 1 996, the classic two wheel and the sport design wheel, which is also known as the GT3.1 wheel. So my GT3 wheels, they're 8.5 inches wide on the front, offset of 40 millimeters. They're 11" wide on the rear, offset of 63mm. I then looked at these two other wheels, so the 7.5mm front wheel, offset 50, and the 8" wheel, offset 52. And wondered, okay, if I wanted to space these wheels out to meet the same outside edge of the GT3 wheels, how much would I have to space them? And the answer is, for the 7.5" wheel, a 22.7mm spacer to get it out the same stance as that GT3 wheel. And then on the classic wheels and the sport design wheels, an 18.3mm spacer to get them out to that same position, which was more than I was expecting, but that's where it sits. They all have the same rear wheel specs of a 10" and a 65mm offset. And to reach that, you'd have to put a 14.7mm spacer on, which is interesting because everybody says 50mm spacers all round, will they, won't they fit, and it's absolutely the same as a GT3 stance. Well, it depends what you're starting off with, because there's a big difference, and you're actually doing it less on the front and more on the rear. So yeah, I then started looking at these wheels, and I looked at a load of pictures of people that had put spacers on their car, how the stance was of the car and how it looked. And one thing I noted was in America, loads of people with the early Gen 1 cars were putting 15mm spacers on the front and 7mm spacers on the rear, which was the reverse of what people seem to be doing in the UK and or some of the European sites. But what makes really good sense is if you've got these early 7.5" wide wheels, a 50mm spacer on the front and a 7mm spacer on the rear brings both front and rear wheels set in 7.7mm equally from the GT3 final faces of the wheel, and that's why it looks so well balanced, because it's exactly set in the same from those GT3 wheels. So yeah, I completely understand that logic. If you're starting out with these wheels, it seems to make perfect sense. When you start to look at the BBS wheels, now all of these different spacer options, I've looked at, okay, where does the inside edge of the wheel sit versus my GT3 wheels, and where does the outside edge of the wheel sit? So 15mm spacers all round seems to be super popular in the UK. And what happens? Well, it spaces the wheel out so the inside edge has 9.3mm more clearance, and the outside edge of the wheel is slightly less than the GT3 by 3.3mm. And on the rear, with that 15mm spacer, it actually gives you a 25.7mm more clearance to the shock, the inside edge of the wheel, and it pushes it out further than the GT3 wheel, but only by 0.3mm. So that, looking at all these pictures of all the various different setups, it gave me a good understanding of what spacers would do with the car. This doesn't take into account the scrub radius at the front, and that was one of the key things I was looking at. If I look at the offset difference front to rear, and I'm using the 18.3mm assumed spacer on my GT3 versus the rear, I could work out there's an 80% difference front to rear between the outside face. On the turbo look, there was a 47% difference with these spacers. So I was just trying to work out what the difference in stance was when you start to change these around. I looked at a load of aftermarket wheels and started to calculate where they would sit. And then I got into the realms of working out, okay, well, if I want custom wheels, where do I want the wheels to be? And the logic for me was, okay, the front was too aggressive, but if I kept it, rather than an 8.5" and 8" wheel, I kept it at ET40, I was actually just going to take off 6.3mm of the inside and outside edge of the wheel. So the center line of the wheel does not change, it's exactly the same. So therefore my scrub radius is bang on the GT3 wheel. That makes me happy because it means I'm not going to change the dynamics of the car. Then on the rear, I didn't want to get it sat out as far as the GT3 wheel, I wanted it further in. So I'd worked out the approximate of a 10mm spacer on the rear would give me a 4.7mm step back in from the original stance. So what I ended up with and what I ordered was essentially a 16.4mm spacer on the front and a 10mm spacer on the rear versus my original 7.5" wheel. Yeah. Loads of other calculations here, lots of different offsets you can see for the front, offsets and sizes for the rear, and where I was going to end up. So when I was comparing wheels, I was using a website, willtheyfit.com. It's brilliant because you can plug in all the specs of the wheel and the tyres, offset, etc., and work out where your original wheel was and where your new wheel's going to be. And then it gives you a nice graphic so you can see where they sit. So the green box being my new wheels, the amber box being the old GT3.2 wheels. So at the front, I'm losing 6.3 mil of, let's call it poke, and I'm also losing 6.3 mil off the rear face of the wheel, so it's moving away from the suspension. And on the rear wheel, I'm losing 4.7 of that poke and another 20.7 off the rear towards the suspension. I've also gone for much smaller section tyres on the rear, so I'm going from 295 down to 265, so you can see the stance of that. It actually gives me a higher rolling radius, marginal, but it does. And then on the front, this will give me, I've gone for a 225 versus the 235 that originally there. So again, a slightly smaller track on the front. But that is how I used and came to all of those calculations on the Excel spreadsheet. I didn't do them manually. I don't suggest you do either. You'll be going out of your mind with calculations. But by using this website, it's real quick and easy to work out what your before and after will look like. So I can hide what they are no more. The wheels have arrived. Yeah, they literally just landed. So they're from Braid, a Spanish manufacturer. You may or may not have heard of them. They move in the motorsport world essentially, but they don't really sell wheels amongst the aftermarket performance car market. They're primarily just a motorsport wheel, and because of that, the things like centre caps aren't a thing. You know, motorsport rims tend not to run with centre caps, and I had a little bit of umming and ahhing because they could have machined a centre cap for me, but in doing so it would have changed the offset specifically for the rear wheels, so I decided against having a machined centre cap. So let's have a look. Hopefully I can get into this box without too much of a challenge. Given that they ship from Spain, I would assume that the packaging is quite substantial. I'm getting there. Let's pull it out. Sorry for the quality of the video right now, but let's see what we've got. Let's see what we're dealing with. This is literally, you're going to see them as I see them. Crikey, they look amazing. Wow. So what we've got, so they're essentially a silver gunmetal finish wheel, and then they're machined from the centre. So the entire centre section of the wheel is machined out for to keep them nice and lightweight, which is why I'm saying once you add spaces to a wheel, you're going to have excess metal. They've got steel inserts for the seat of the bolts. And yeah, that is light. Another huge benefit of these wheels is this inside section of the rim. So inside the barrel, it's corrugated for extra strength. This really ramps up the strength of the inside edge of the wheel. So yeah, these are used in competition in rally, so you can imagine how much punishment they're designed to take. And that's the inside face of the wheel. Everything custom made for me. Well, I'm a very happy boy right now, I'm not gonna lie. I need to get them loaded up in the car and see if I can get the tyres mounted.